Fellas, every UFC champion has a kryptonite in their division, and I'm going to be going through every single current UFC champion in the men's divisions from Jon Jones to Pantoja and picking out 3 of the most dangerous contenders. That doesn't necessarily mean I think these contenders beat the champions, but just 3 really dangerous contenders for every UFC champion, stylistically, whatever it may be, just 3 tough contenders. So let me know who you think is the toughest contender for every champion. Starting off with Jon Jones, the #1 most difficult contender for Jon Jones, undoubtedly Tom Aspinall. There's a reason Jones don't want to fight Aspinall. It's because he knows he'd lose. Aspinall, he's super well-rounded. He's quick on the feet. He's the fastest heavyweight in the division right now. Arguably one of the most powerful as well. He's super quick. We just saw him knock out Sergey Pavlovich not long ago. Knocked out Marcin Tybura as well. Submitted Alexander Volkov. Aspinall is great everywhere. He's a great grappler. He's a great striker. He knocks out guys who can knock other people out. He can out-grapple grapplers. Aspinall's just super well-rounded wherever the fight goes. And that's a problem for Jon Jones, who looks slow on the feet against Ciryl Gane, and I know he took Ciryl Gane down pretty effortlessly and was able to submit him, but that's Ciryl Gane. Aspinall and Ciryl Gane, when it comes to grappling, completely different level. Aspinall, I think he finishes Jon Jones within 2 rounds, and yeah, I'm going Aspinall for the #1 most difficult fight for Jones. Then we've got #2, which I'm going with Curtis Blaydes. Now, obviously, they're never going to fight. I'm pretty sure they're training partners, but Blaydes is a difficult fight for anyone in the division. I mean, on the feet, he's got pop in his hands. He hits hard. We just saw, I know he wasn't a strike. He didn't finish Jailton Almeida with striking, but he just came off a knockout, a TKO over Jailton Almeida at UFC 299. But he's dangerous on the feet, and he's also a great wrestler. Again, it's not like Jon Jones can just go for the takedown and get him down effortlessly like he did with Ciryl Gane. Blaydes is a wrestler first. He knows how to wrestle. And, I mean, we just saw him face a wrestler and compose him pretty quickly. He took out Jailton Almeida pretty effortlessly in that second round. So Curtis Blaydes, another really good wrestler, and just a stylistic problem for anyone in the division, and definitely Jon Jones. Again, I'm not saying he'd win the fight, but he's definitely a stylistic problem. And then 3rd place, Sergey Pavlovich. Before the Aspinall fight, everyone was saying, oh, Sergey Pavlovich would demolish Jon Jones. And now that he's been knocked out by Tom Aspinall, all of the people that were saying that are nowhere to be seen. Sergey Pavlovich is still a big problem for Jon Jones. You think Jon Jones is knocking out Sergey Pavlovich like Aspinall did? You're delusional. On the feet, this is one of the most difficult fights for Jon Jones. Sergey Pavlovich, still insanely dangerous. Remember, before the Aspinall fight, finishing with 6 first-round knockouts in a row. Really good boxing. Quite ploddy, I understand, but he's got a Greco-Roman wrestling background as well. It's not like another Ciryl Gane where he can only strike. He's good everywhere, specifically on the feet he's dangerous, and even though I do think Jones would beat him, it's undoubtedly still a difficult matchup like he was even before the Aspinall fight, and he still is, because Jones ain't knocking out Pavlovich like Aspinall did. So those are the 3 toughest contenders for Jon Jones. Then we've got Alex Pereira, #1, Magomed Ankalaev. I mean, this should be the next fight in the 205 division for the belt. We've just seen Pereira knock out Hill, and this makes sense next. I mean, we'll talk about his striking first of all. Ankalaev has pop in his hands. He's had multiple knockouts in the UFC right now, coming off a knockout over Johnny Walker as well, which is really impressive. And I'm not saying he's a better striker than Alex Pereira, but he's still got pop in his hands and he's still dangerous on the feet. Great kickboxer. And I think what makes him so good on the feet is the fact that he can keep people guessing with his grappling. Ankalaev is the best wrestler, in my opinion, at 205. And I'd say he's a striker first, but because there's not too many grapplers in that division, he's a really good wrestler. And I think that's the biggest problem with Pereira. Pereira's been out-wrestled and struggled with wrestling in lots of his fights. We saw it in a Yuri fight, specifically the Jan Blachowicz fight. Even in the Adesanya fights, we saw Pereira struggle with wrestling, which is going to be basically a nightmare to deal with when you've got a guy that's dangerous on the feet in Ankalaev that can keep you guessing, that can also wrestle. Real big problem, and I don't even know if I like Pereira's chances against Ankalaev. The next contender we've got is Yuri Prochazka. I understand that Pereira's beaten him before, but you look at that fight, Yuri wasn't doing bad at all. In fact, he was landing shots against Alex Pereira. It wasn't like Pereira was battering him. Yuri was starting to do really well, but because Yuri's really defensively, he's just not defensively sound. He got caught by a big shot and got finished by Alex Pereira, which even that was controversial because a lot of people think Mark Goddard stopped it too early and Yuri could have gone on because he went up immediately. But yeah, Pereira versus Yuri, I feel like if these guys were to fight 10 times, Yuri would definitely win a couple of them. It's a big fight. It's a difficult fight for Alex Pereira, and even though he'd win the majority of the fights, still a difficult fight. We just saw what Yuri did to Alexander Rakic, and I think, yeah, still a big problem for Pereira. And then 3rd place, maybe I'm buying on the hype train too much, but I'm going Vito Petrino. I understand this guy's like ranked 15. He's barely ranked in the light heavyweight division, and he couldn't even finish Tyson Pedro, but I see this guy's like the Gelton Almeida of the 205 division, but just with better striking. He can strike, he can grapple, he can do everything. He's super well-rounded. He's going to be facing Anthony Smith at UFC 301, which, by the way, he's going to absolutely demolish him. And then we can start seeing Vitor Petrino in the contendership of 205, and I think within 2 or 3 fights he's going to be fighting for a belt. His wrestling is amazing, which again is a problem when you're facing Pereira, who's only just transitioned from kickboxing like 3 years ago. Big problem for Pereira because of the wrestling and the fact that he can mix it up so well, and the guy's massive as well as Vitor Petrino. I don't know how he makes light heavyweight, but those are the 3 dangerous contenders for Pereira. The number 1 most dangerous contender for Dricus, in my opinion, is Israel Adesanya, and I say that because Dricus's style is really awkward. He hasn't really got the most technical style. It's kind of just a really how do I describe it? He's just got a really, it's not an aesthetic style to watch, and I can just see Israel Adesanya being the calculated guy he is, being the technician he is, landing a big shot on Dricus du Plessis, buckling his knees, and then landing another big shot and putting his lights out. I can just see Dricus du Plessis. I understand he's a machine and he can mix it up with his grappling, but I can just see Adesanya landing a big shot, and it looks like we're going to be seeing this fight at UFC 305, and honestly, even though Dricus du Plessis wins every fight, it's almost as if every time he fights, it's not like we're super impressed. It's almost as if we're just there like, how did he win that fight? Either it was a robbery or he nearly died in that fight. And I just think against a guy who's experienced like Adesanya, I can just see him clipping Dricus. Next contender we've got is Jared Cannonier. I think Jared Cannonier, stylistically, is the most difficult fight for Dricus du Plessis out of every contender. This guy went out there in his last fight and really impressed me by battering Marvin Vettori, setting records on Marvin Vettori, basically for 5 rounds straight. And by the way, where is Jared Cannonier? The guy just battered Marvin Vettori and hasn't been seen since. So I hope he's back soon, because Jared Cannonier is probably 1 fight away from a title shot. Again, I'm pretty sure it was 2022, might have been, 2022 when this guy beat Sean Strickland as well. And I know it was a controversial win, but he still beat him. And I think overall, because Jared Cannonier's got a good wrestling base, which again can counter Dricus when he's got good wrestling, and the fact that he's got powerful hands, high output, he's got cardio, which again, Dricus has struggled with cardio in the past, and Cannonier's got great stamina, great output, as we just saw in the Vettori fight. Overall, big problem for Dricus, and I think Cannonier would or could actually beat Dricus du Plessis. And then 3rd place, it would be rude to not go with Sean Strickland. Arguably beat Dricus du Plessis in the last fight, and because it was such a close fight and it was so controversial, I've got to include Sean Strickland. Again, similar to Yuri Prohaska and Alex Pereira, you match these guys against each other 10 times. I can definitely see Strickland winning a few of them, so I'm going Sean Strickland 3rd place. Big problem for Dricus du Plessis. I mean, we just saw them fight at UFC 297, and that was the case. So those are the 3 contenders for Dricus. Leon Edwards number 1. I'm going Jack Della Maddalena. I think Leon Edwards is more technical and he takes less risks than JDM, which is why he's so successful. But I think JDM's definitely more dangerous than Leon Edwards. But the thing is, JDM can do everything Leon Edwards can. I mean, when it comes to boxing and just striking overall, JDM is one of the most dangerous but crisp boxers in the UFC. That fight with Kevin Holland and even the fight with Gilbert Burns, his shot selection was amazing. That's a problem when you're against Leon Edwards. Leon Edwards, in his past few fights, has been going against guys that basically can't hang with him on the feet. Colby Covington, Usman, these heavy grappling styles. Now we're throwing him in there with one of the most dangerous strikers in the welterweight division in JDM. And JDM can grapple as well. He was able to survive against Gilbert Burns. In fact, at one point he actually did an insane trip over Gilbert Burns as well, throwing him to the canvas. JDM, I think he's the most difficult fight for Leon Edwards, and I reckon he's 1 fight away from actually being matched up against Edwards if Edwards is still the champion. So Edwards versus JDM, real big problem for Leon Edwards. At number 2, I've got to go Shavkat Rakhmonov. Now, the reason he's not number 1 is because Leon has been facing grappler after grappler, so I feel like he's kind of used to the style. But Shavkat's a completely different style to the your normal conventional grappler. He's finished every single fighter he's faced. He's got scary submissions. He's a submission artist. We just saw him go out there and take out Wonderboy Thompson. And again, he's either next in line or he's at least 1 fight away from a title shot. So for Shavkat Rakhmonov, if he gets hold of Leon Edwards, it's a real big problem for Leon Edwards because of how good of a grappler Shavkat is. And then 3rd place, I've got to give him his respect, Bilal Muhammad. An improved... I just kind of see this guy as an improved version of Colby Covington. He actually performs when he's supposed to fight. He might not be the most interesting, whatever, but he actually performs. He's got really, well, he ain't got really good striking, but he's got improved striking, at least since the last time he fought Leon Edwards, and obviously he's got really good wrestling. I don't think he'd beat Leon Edwards, but I've got to give him his respect because he's kind of turning well-rounded. He beat Gilbert Burns, and the fact that he's definitely next in line for a title shot. It's Bilal, remember the name, Muhammad, and then we've got Islam Makhachev. The number one biggest test for Islam has to be Arman Tsarukyan, and I'm saying this because of his performance at UFC 300. People are critiquing him for going out there and beating Charles Oliveira, but you've got to remember, outside of Islam Makhachev, nobody could beat Charles Oliveira. Gaethje couldn't, Poirier couldn't, Chandler couldn't, Dariush couldn't. No one could beat Charles Oliveira. So for Arman Tsarukyan to go out there and do that, that's really impressive. We've seen Arman Tsarukyan. He's got a very heavy wrestling base, which again is quite unfavorable against Islam Makhachev. Islam tends to do well against strikers, and now that we're putting him against another wrestler, I'm really intrigued to see how he does. And I'm actually talking about a wrestler, not just a grappler in Charles Oliveira, a wrestler in Arman Tsarukyan, who's also dangerous on the feet, as we saw in the fight with Beneil Dariush in previous fights. Arman Tsarukyan, super well-rounded, dangerous on the feet, great wrestler, has fought Islam Makhachev before and put up a really close fight, and I think this would be a super competitive fight. I'd probably lean towards Islam Makhachev winning this fight, but it's still a super competitive fight in the lightweight division. In second place, I'm going Michael Chandler. Again, I understand this guy's got really bad fight IQ, just like Curtis Blades, but Michael Chandler, when you really break it down, is a difficult fight for Islam Makhachev. A really difficult fight for Islam. I mean, the wrestling of Michael Chandler, first of all, super impressive wrestling. He's wrestling. He's not really shown it too much in the UFC, but that's definitely going to combat Islam Makhachev's heavy offensive wrestling base. And then on the feet, Michael Chandler's explosive. He hits like a truck, and if he lands a big one on Islam Makhachev, I'm just saying, I'm not sure if Islam survives that. So yeah, Chandler, he's got terrible fight IQ, but I feel like Chandler's one of those fighters where he loses to a lot of the fighters ranked below him, but then beats a lot of the fighters ranked above him, if you know what I mean. So yeah, I'm going Chandler for number 2, and then number 3, I'm going Gamrot. Yeah, Gamrot, I don't think he'd beat Islam Makhachev, to be completely honest with you, but I've got to recognise the fact that he's a good wrestler, and anyone with decent wrestling in the lightweight division is going to be a tough fight for Islam Makhachev. Islam, if you face him against a striker, they're toast. You put him against a wrestler, they could probably put up a good fight, and that's why I'm going Gamrot number 3, just because of the wrestling. I think Islam would beat him, but because he's got the wrestling, and because he's improved pretty much every fight since the Dariush fight. Well, he's only had a few since then, but yeah, I've got to go Gamrot number 3, and I can't include Oliveira because I feel like Oliveira would get destroyed just like he did in the first fight, especially after that performance against Gamrot. So Islam, those are 3 contenders. Then we've got Ilia Topuria. The hardest fight for Ilia Topuria is Max Holloway. In fact, I think this would be a 50-50 fight. I genuinely don't know who to choose in this fight. It's impossible. Their last performances were amazing. They both looked great, but I've got to go with Max Holloway being number 1. After that performance against Justin Gaethje, the performance against Arnold Allen, the performance against Korean Zombie, Holloway is rightfully the next contender in the featherweight division, and he is a big, big problem for Ilia Topuria. It's not just another guy for Topuria to be superior against on the feet, because Holloway is arguably the best boxer, one of the best strikers in the UFC right now. He's been around for so long, he's faced various different styles, and I think Holloway definitely could be the guy to end the undefeated streak of Ilia Topuria. So I'm going Holloway number 1 undoubtedly. Number 2, I'm going Movsar Evloev. I don't think Evloev would beat Topuria, but we've got to recognise that you look at the grapplers that Topuria's faced. Bryce Mitchell, Ryan Hall. These guys are nowhere near Evloev. Evloev's a much more technical grappler than those guys, much more difficult grappler, and I'm not saying he's going to out-grapple Ilia Topuria, because Ilia Topuria is also a great wrestler, and he's a better striker than Evloev. Even though Evloev can hang on the feet, he's still a better striker, but because Evloev, he's probably the best grappler that Topuria would have faced in the UFC, I've got to give him his props and put him at number 2. And then number 3, unironically, I'm going Arnold Allen. I think when you actually break down Arnold Allen's style, he's a difficult fight for Topuria. I mean, look at him. This guy, he's a stylistic nightmare. He's dangerous. He's got dangerous, and he's got great boxing. If he was to stand there and trade with Topuria, he could get knocked out. But at the same time, because of his power and the fact that he comes to scrap all the time, that could be dangerous for Topuria. He's a great wrestler as well. He's super well-rounded. And overall, him versus Topuria would be a war, and it would definitely end in a finish. And it wouldn't actually shock me if Arnold Allen was to be the guy to finish Ilia Topuria because of the style of Arnold Allen. So that's my 3 for Ilia Topuria. Then we've got Sean O'Malley coming in at first place for O'Malley. I've gone with Merab. Merab, I mean, you've got to acknowledge his grappling. To do that to Henry Cejudo. Henry Cejudo is one of the best wrestlers in the UFC, and to go out there and basically dominate Cejudo with wrestling, that it shows that Merab is on another level. And not even the Cejudo fight, the Peter Yan fight, dominating Peter Yan like it was nothing. Sean O'Malley went life and death with Peter Yan. So for Merab to go out there and practically put on one of the biggest, most dominating performances of the year, you've got to give him credit for that performance. And I think if Merab can get hold of Sean O'Malley, I really don't like Sean O'Malley's chances. Even though Sean O'Malley could catch him on the feet because so did Cejudo, I'm not sure I like O'Malley's chances if Merab gets a hold of him. So I'm going Merab number 1, rightful next contender. Number 2, I'm going Corey Sandhagen. Yeah, Corey Sandhagen, again, he's similar to Merab, but he's also dangerous on the feet. I mean, we've seen Sandhagen on the feet in various fights. One of the best strikers in the bantamweight division, which, again, he could be a problem for Sean O'Malley on the feet, especially with the fact that he could keep him guessing, because we've seen in his last few fights that Sandhagen's kind of adopted this new grappling style. As we saw against Marlon Vera and Rob Font, Sandhagen's definitely improved his wrestling so much in his past few fights. I assume it's because he's preparing for a guy like Nurmagomedov, but Sandhagen, the fact that he's got this new style and he's actually turned well around, that he can keep O'Malley guessing, 100% a difficult fight, and I think Sandhagen's only probably one more win away from a title shot. And then finally, I'm going Umar Nurmagomedov. You could arguably say that right now he is one of the best, if not the best wrestler at 135. His performances have been amazing. He's got pop in his hands. He's a dangerous striker. If he connects, he hits like a truck. Again, I'm not saying he's a better striker than Sean O'Malley, but he could keep him guessing. And this guy's wrestling so far has been amazing. He's undefeated, and I think it can be a real problem for Sean O'Malley. 1 or 2 more wins, and this guy's probably going to get a title shot. Maybe we see Nurmagomedov versus Sandhagen next. I'm not sure, but that's my 3 contenders for Sean O'Malley. And then finally, Pantoja, number 1. I'm going Steve Erceg. The guy is going to be facing Pantoja in the next pay-per-view at UFC 301. I think if Erceg can survive the first 3 rounds, if he can survive the early onslaught of Pantoja, I think Erceg knocks him out in the 4th and the 5th round. I've noticed about Pantoja, he tends to kind of not necessarily fade away, but he becomes a lot more vulnerable in the 4th and the 5th round. He seems to be gassed out. His shots aren't as effective. He's a lot more vulnerable in those later rounds. And you can't really afford to do that against a boxer like Steve Erceg, who's got power in his hands, coming off a knockout, dangerous boxer. And I think if Erceg can land a clean shot on Pantoja in the later rounds, that's a real big problem for Pantoja. And I actually think Steve Erceg is going to beat Pantoja. Obviously, I'm going to do a more in-depth prediction video on the fight week of UFC 301, but Erceg, I really do think he's going to beat Pantoja because of the later rounds and the fact that Pantoja becomes so vulnerable. Number 2, I've got to go Brandon Moreno. I mean, that 3rd fight was razor close. They both had good moments. It was an absolute war. One of the best fights of 2023. And again, I know they fought 3 times and Pantoja's won all of them, but it's still a difficult fight. If you put Moreno in there with Pantoja right now, it is not an easy fight with Pantoja. It's a tough fight. It would be an absolute scrap to the war, and it would just be, well, scrap till the end. Yeah, really difficult fight for Pantoja, as we've seen in the trilogy, and I've got to give Moreno his respect. He gave Pantoja the biggest run for his money. And in 3rd place, I'm going Muhammad Makayev. Yeah, Pantoja hasn't really been facing grapplers recently. He's about to face Steve Erceg. He's faced Royval. He's faced Moreno. This is a completely new style to Pantoja. A wrestler in Muhammad Makayev, who's not only just good at wrestling, but he's super well-rounded. I understand he didn't look that impressive in his last performance against Alex Perez, but you've got to give it to Makayev. He's dangerous when it comes to grappling. He can find submissions from everywhere, and even on the feet. I know he didn't look impressive on the feet in his last fight, but in the past, he's been able to land big shots. He's been able to be effective on the feet, and the fact that he's undefeated, never lost a fight, and this guy's tough as well. This guy, whenever you put him in a submission, that knee submission that he got put him at not long ago, the fact that he was able to escape that and then get a finish of his own in that fight, super impressive with Makayev. And yeah, I think Alejandro Pantoja, the 3rd toughest contender would be Makayev. And yeah, that, in my opinion, is the toughest contender for every UFC champion. Let me know if you agree. Let me know who you think the toughest contender for every champion is. That's my top 3 for each champion. Thank you for watching.